All right, hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in once again to the Black Box Podcast, BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Well, presidential candidate Beto O'Rourke is in some hot water for making a few jokes on the campaign trail already, and also a story that he wrote as a teenager has kind of resurfaced, and a lot of people are calling into question Beto O'Rourke's mental state by people who are actually genuinely criticizing whether or not Beto O'Rourke has the sort of psychiatric state and mental health fitness to be the president of the United States. They were referring to a story that he wrote where he describes a man taking pleasure in running over children, and you can find little excerpts of this thing online. It's even turned into sort of a Facebook meme. They're talking about how Beto wrote about a guy who feels that he is filled with sweet feelings as he puts his foot on the gas and runs over two children, saying that he earned the right to have their lives because of something that he received in his dreams. Now, if you've heard some of my previous uploads on Beto O'Rourke on this channel, I'm not a fan of the guy. I don't particularly like him, and I don't think he's going to do too well in the primaries. I don't think he's going to be the next president of the United States, at least not in 2020. We won't have the Beto O'Rourke 2020 inauguration. But this is going to be one of the things where you just have to stand up and you have to be like, it's a story. And this is actually one of the times when I would be coming to the defense on that side, when you're just like, someone wrote a story, it is fiction. That means it's not real. And the only reason why they're challenging Beto O'Rourke for stuff like this is, well, the first thing is because it's a distraction from the issues, because people just love distractions on the political trail, as opposed to talking about kind of who's supporting candidates financially. No, they want to talk about what kind of story did somebody write about in high school. And the second thing really is this is also just trying to diminish someone's character because he's running for office. We would never hold people like Stephen King or Alfred Hitchcock or Thomas Harris, or even to go back further, H.P. Lovecraft, to these types of standards. I mean, like, are we going to say that, Mary Shelley and Frankenstein and all that stuff is like also a significant trait of poor mental health because Shelley wrote a story about some guy sewing bodies together? Absolutely not. No. Yeah, put it in every literature class in the university or high school curriculum. I mean, the only reason why they're going after him is because of a sort of political smear campaign, which isn't unheard of. We know these things are going to happen. Beto O'Rourke knew that these things were going to happen. But you want to criticize Beto O'Rourke, why don't you look at him giving a TED talk about something associated with immigration? But then people are saying that he actually has a sort of voting record that is more in line with a Republican right winger when it comes to things that are dealing with immigrant issues. Not to mention, I don't know how true these things are, but people on the internet have been talking about how Beto O'Rourke during the 2018 election took more money from the fossil fuel industry than any other Democrat in both houses of Congress, the Senate and the House of Representatives. And the only person that took more money than him was Ted Cruz. So as we see, something's going on with the Texas Senate election. I've mentioned on this channel before how it's possible for a person to say two things at once. I said Tenet instead of Texas Senate. Sometimes that happens. But when we want to kind of look at Beto's likelihood of becoming president, well, some of the other criticisms that people are drawing on Beto's record are not about writing the short story where he details, some horrific acts committed by a person. They're actually about Beto having charges in the past associated with burglary and DUI. And they're sort of saying that they don't want someone with that type of record, in the White House. And I would just ask you that. I mean, I'm sure that there are a million things that people would have coming to mind when it comes to that particular thing. I mean, I'll say sort of no comment for now, other than what do you think? Do you think that Beto's sort of record with burglary and DUI might come back to haunt him a little bit more? Because right now, we really want to talk about Beto O'Rourke is apparently wrote a story back when he was a teenager about these disturbing events, and saw some headlines that he apologized for it. And this is something that maybe his consultants, his political team, the people who are advising him, perhaps they recommended that. Should he have apologized? I don't think so. I don't think he should have apologized for writing a work of fiction, no matter how graphic. Because when it comes to creativity, we often expand and we often push the boundaries. And that's for the sake of creativity. Just because, like, you want to create an interesting story, and what about the genres of horror? What about things like thrillers? What about all of the things that just kind of make people feel different emotions? I mean, life can't only be about romantic comedies or something like that. There are other ways of thinking, and there, as we mentioned, we hold no one to that standard. No one to that standard at all who is not involved in politics. Does it say anything about somebody's mental state if they have composed a work of fiction that deals with some sort of horrific act? No, absolutely not. Because one of the things that we have to accept, and we talked about this when we kind of did the review of Killer Kids, and we were talking about Elise Paler, the girl who was murdered by some people, and they were trying to cite the band Slayer as an influence. Well, there's one guy who was like in that series Killer Kids, which was available on Netflix. He was a psychologist, and he was sort of saying, if someone can't differentiate between fiction and reality, you don't blame the fiction. That person probably has some existing psychological problem. A human is expected to know that something is fictional and that this is, in a fictional fantasy world that isn't dealing with real people, and that these are real people. That, like, these are people who are living on the actual planet Earth. And I mean, I thought that guy kind of had a nice presentation, a nice take on the subject, where it's like, just because someone is watching a horror movie, that doesn't mean the person who created the horror movie has any mental problem. And say, for example, someone actually does watch a movie or plays a video game, or in the case of Elise Paler, as we mentioned, some kids said they were listening to music and cited that as an influence. Even if they listen to a music that deals with horrific things, Marilyn Manson was caught up with that back in Columbine. They blamed him. And if they actually hear something horrific from a work of fiction, mind you, or even something that isn't really fiction, like a song or something like that, and they become destructive after hearing that, that person already had an existing problem. And I mean, yes, maybe there could be some influence at some point, maybe, but the point is that person's already going down the slippery slope. And you can't blame fiction. You can't blame the artwork, or you can't blame the movies, the music, the TV, the video games, or in this case with Beto O'Rourke, a short story. You can't just kind of look at that and just use these things as pathways into mental illness. I mean, that's kind of just scapegoating. And the whole point that we're just tying this all up with the Beto O'Rourke issue is, I don't think he should have apologized for creating a work of fiction. It's fiction, not real. It's not dealing with real people, and it's not any sort of declaration that he actually wants to do these things. It's just a creative project, and everybody knows it. It's just a distraction from the real issues, and it's just a distraction from a wide variety of things. But, it is politics, and it is somewhat sensational, and I'm doing a recording about it now. It gets you talking, but there's some things that you just have to kind of voice. Even though I don't really like Beto O'Rourke that much as a politician, I don't think he should have apologized for writing a short story, and I would defend him on his right to write any sort of creepy, messed up, twisted, disturbed thriller horror, crazy ass motherfucking horror story that he would want to. Anything that he would want. Or you too, and me, anyone. It's fiction, it's creative.